So we're playing against a player in a 15-minute game. So Jakubovic opens with the queen's pawn. He plays d4. We're going to play knight f6. The knight develops and controls the e4 square. So he plays c4. We're going to play e6. Now, the purpose of the e6 pawn is twofold. It opens the way for the bishop to escape. For example, if the opponent plays nc3 as he just did, you see white is threatening to play e4 and establish a trio of pawns in the center. So I have two ways to block this central expansion with e4. Either I push d5, because if the pawn is taken, I can recapture with a pawn and still double the control over the e4 square. Or I play bishop to b4 to pin the knight on c3, which means the knight on c3 won't be able to support the e4 push. And that's the move I'm going to choose. Bishop b4, it develops and it pins. So here, what is the main move? I think it's queen to c2. The queen can be positioned on c2. It's true that it protects the knight, but it also supports the e4 push. Otherwise, you can simply keep developing with moves like knight f3, e3, or bishop g5, which comes to establish this pin against the knight on f6. My opponent plays bishop to d2. He prefers to unpin, but he's not actually threatening the e4 push. Because if he plays e4, I'll exchange his knight, bishop takes, and I'll win the pawn on e4. So here, I'll simply kingside castling, and I still have control over the e4 square. So he just played knight e4 himself. So what is he trying to tell me? If I take his knight, he takes my bishop. If I take his bishop with check, he'll be able to recapture with the knight. And so his knight on e4 won't be left hanging on that square. Well, I think I'm going to go for this line anyway. I'll play bishop takes, the knight has to recapture, and then it's my move. I'll have better development than my opponent. I'm checking if I have any other moves, but for now I don't see any. No, I'm going to do that. I take. So if he doesn't want to lose his knight, he has to recapture with the knight. Are we on the same page? There, that's what he does. And now he's still planning to play e4 and build a strong pawn center. So I need to start putting pressure on hitting his center. So I can do that, notably with the d5 push. Always with the idea that if he takes, I recapture with the pawn and still control the e4 square. Yes. I can also attack the d4 pawn by pushing c5. Now, it's true that he can take, but the c5 pawn, I think I can get it back pretty easily by playing moves like queen to a5, for example. And by attacking it from the side, still pinning the knight on d2. What bothers me about this d5 push is that if he takes and I simply recapture with the pawn, my opponent will probably actually play e3. And two files open up. I get the e file and he gets the c file. On d5, capture, recapture, we create a structure called the Carlsbad pawn structure. So I think I'm still well developed in this structure. But I don't feel very comfortable playing it, because white has plans based on minority attacks that often bother me. You see, after d5, capture, recapture. Generally, at some point, you play ci6 to build this chain of pawns with b7 protecting c6, which protects d5, and the opponent can have a plan to break this chain of pawns with moves like rook to b1, b4, b5, and play on the queen side, which should normally be compensated by a kingside attack. But I no longer have my dark squared bishop, you see. Normally, after d5, capture, recapture, I would like to have my dark squared bishop aiming toward the king side. And the absence of this dark squared bishop makes me think that, thank you. I'll have fewer resources, fewer assets to attack his future kingside castling. So I'm going to play it differently. I'm going to play pawn to d6, which will prepare the e5 push to attack his center with e5, and at the same time free my bishop on c8. I'm also trying to set up a pawn structure on the dark square, and since I have the light square bishop, it will actually complement the control of the colors. There's a certain balance. Generally, when you have a pawn structure on the dark square, it's better to have the light square bishop, and vice versa. Pawn structure on the white square, the dark square bishop. So here, if my opponent plays e4, I play e5. and I'm going to block his pawn on e4. And if he ends up with a pawn on e4, for example, let's say he goes for d5 and sets up a pawn structure with e4, d5, c4, the 3 pawns on white square will block his bishop on f1. You see, I play e5. My idea is that these pawns on d5, e4, and c4, and the pawn on d5 will block all the diagonals of his white square bishop. So he's not obliged to push, but for now I'm threatening to take. He can also take, and that's what he does. I recapture. The d file opens up, but look at what happens on the file. It's very instructive. You might think that the d file opens for both players, and that after all it's the same for both sides. But it's not the same at all. He has a redundancy with the pawns on e4 and c4, which both control the same square, the d5 square. The d5 square, which I can control with the advance of the c6 pawn. That is, white won't be able to establish a piece on that square, since I can control it with a pawn. But the d4 square, now that's an interesting square for me, because he doesn't have a pawn to control that square. So if I place a knight on d4 with knight c6 and knight d4, it can't be chased away by a pawn. So that's something I'm interested in. So I'm really tempted to play knight c6 here. And look at how he plays with g2, which blocks f3, which blocks e4 and c4. He feels a sense of relative safety, but it doesn't work well at all with his white square bishop. So he could try to play c5. Maybe that's actually what he wants, because sometimes when you play c6 to control the d5 square, white plays c5 and the pawn controls the d6 square, and then you get moves like knight to c4 and the knight jumping into d6. Now I'm wondering if it wouldn't be in my best interest to play c5 myself. Granted, I wouldn't have the move c6 anymore to control the d5 square, but he can't occupy that d5 square for now. His knight on d2 is badly placed. If it were on c3, the knight could jump into d5, but it's on d2. And so my idea with c5 is to have double control over the d4 square and to be able myself to occupy that square, especially by playing knight to c6, then knight to d4, bringing my knight onto that square. And I'll get there much faster than he will, since to exploit the d5 square, his knight would have to retreat and come back around. So maybe I'll play c5. I'm not in a hurry. I'm checking if I have any other moves. No, that's how I'm going to play it. I play c5. I have a knight that's able to exploit the weakness of the d4 square, whereas he won't be able to get a knight to d5, at least not anytime soon. And blocking c4 and e4 hinders the development of the bishop in f1. So he plays knight b3. He offers a queen's exchange, and at the same time he attacks the pawn c5. Well, I think I'm going to decline the queen's exchange. He's behind in development. His king still hasn't found shelter yet. And generally exchanging queens is either because you have a slightly weaker king or because you have an advantage in the endgame. And here for now my king isn't weaker, so I don't want to exchange queens. Well, the endgame wouldn't be bad for me, but I prefer to keep the queens on the board. So I'm going to move my queen while defending the c5 pawn. Although I'm not necessarily obliged to, because if he takes on c5, I might want to play moves like queen to a5, check, fork, and win back the knight. But if I want, for example, to avoid exchanging queens by letting him take the c5 pawn and being able to counter with queen to a5, I don't have many moves. I could play a move like bishop to d7, thinking that if he takes on c5, I play queen to a5, check, fork, and I win his knight. But here, I'm setting a trap, sure, but if my opponent doesn't fall for it, in the end, my bishop on d7 isn't very well placed. So I think I'm going to play queen to e7. I decline the queen's exchange, I protect c5, and I free up the d8 square so the rook can come and take control of the d file. And soon my knight will settle on d4. I'm going to play it like that. There you go. So we have a symmetrical structure, but I could go to d4. He won't be able to go to d5. And he has a bad bishop on f1. It's a bad bishop because it's on the same color as his chain of pawns. So it's blocked by his own pawns. That's called leukopenia, a disease on a white square. Whereas here I can have knight c6, knight d4, and I have pawns blocked on a black square and a white squared bishop, so the color control is correct. And development is not lacking for me, so he plays g4. He's putting more and more pawns on the white square. And then what's the point of playing g4? None, actually. Because if he plays g5, my knight will be able to go to h5. My queen will attack the g5 pawn, and my knight will head for the new weak square, f4. A weak square is a square that is no longer controlled by a pawn, one that can no longer be defended by a pawn, and that's the case with the f4 square. The d4 square is also weak, as we've discussed. You might say, yes, but later when I put a knight on d4, white could exchange it. Maybe you've noticed that. But recapturing with a pawn will allow you to get a protected passed pawn. That is, I'll have a pawn that's protected by the pawn 5, and it will be a passed pawn. If this c5 pawn ends up on d4, it can no longer be blocked by another opposing pawn, so it will be the major pieces that will constantly have to watch out to prevent this pawn from advancing. Protected passed pawns are often assets. So I think I'm going to play knight c6. I could also play rook d8 and attack his queen. But well, I can do that later. I'll play knight c6 for now. I didn't look, but knight takes g4 is actually interesting. Pawn takes. Queen h4 check. Where does the king go? If he goes to d2, he's going to get hit by rook's d8. If he comes to e2, there will be bishop takes g4 with the king-queen alignment. He plays a3. So now let's see if we can do it. So he takes g4, then pawn takes. Queen h4 check. King. e2. Bishop takes g4 check. He can play knight f3. Yeah. It's true that he can play knight f3. But I find still he'll be pinned. His knight on f3 will be subject to a pin because I'll have my bishop on g4. There's the king back there, the queen. This position isn't normal. It's a shame that his knight controls the d4 square, because after knight takes g4, then pawn takes. Queen h4, check, king e2. Bishop takes g4, check, knight f3. I would have liked to play knight d4 check, attacking his king and his knight, but he'll be able to take. He'll be able to trade the piece with me. Well, there are still a few interesting moves, though. See, knight takes g4, then pawn takes. Queen h4, check, king e2. Foo takes g4, knight f3. Maybe I can play bishop takes knight, lure his king to f3, and then play a move like f5, so that the f-pawn trades with the e-pawn, and the rook starts attacking the king. That seems good to me. I'm going to take the risk to leaven up the game anyway. Knight takes g4. So I'm sacrificing a piece for 2 pawns. I'm going to get 2 pawns for this piece. But I'm depriving his king of shelter. I'm putting him in turmoil. I'm shaking him up. And I think I have a much better sense of harmony and balance in my position, which really helps me to keep fighting and stay determined. By the way, he's thinking, will he take or not? Well, I hope for the sake of the game that he will take, because if he doesn't, I will have won an important pawn, and after that it will be easy for me to roll out my plan. By the way, I'm still threatening queen to h4 check. And to get into f2 with the help of the knight now. For the sake of the game, there we go, he takes, so that's good. So queen to h4 check. He can't go to the d file, otherwise rook to d8. Even if he puts the bishop on d3, in my opinion, it's still very dangerous for him. And I always have bishop takes g4 as an option too, which attacks his queen. So he goes to d2 anyway. He goes to this square d2, so we move our rook to d8, giving a check. So here, if he doesn't want to lose the queen, he plays bishop d3. And here I'm looking at bishop takes g4. I'm attacking his queen, so he might try to play queen 1 to offer the exchange of queens. Then I'm also considering what the sequence is. Rook takes, bishop check, king takes could give, and since I would have had my bishop, the other rook, which comes to give check. But the king seems to be able to escape. So what in-between moves do I have here? If I play queen f2 check, if I play queen e2, she can play queen e2. Because after the rook takes and then the king takes back, absolutely nothing particularly special or noteworthy happens in this position. So I'm going to play bishop takes g4. I'm attacking his queen and connecting my rooks. He plays knight f3. He counterattacks my queen. So if I play bishop takes knight, queen takes. Rook takes bishop, king takes. And rook to d8 check. That's not great. And here, if I play rook takes bishop check, king takes, rook check. And I don't have much time left. Now it's getting... I need to find the winning sequence. I could also play queen h5, go attack his knight 2 times, and keep moves like rook takes, king takes, and the other rook coming to d8 in mind. I'll play it like that. I'm also considering whether to attack his knight with queen h3. Because with queen h3 I have queen g2 afterwards. Maybe I'll go for queen h3. And if the knight is no longer there, well, I would already have bishop takes queen. But the queen is connected to the bishop's attack. So he still has a lot of problems here. There's the pin here, the attack on the knight, the pin here. He also has to deal with queen g2 coming in, attacking the king, putting pressure on the rook, and still attacking the knight. And this possibility of taking the bishop and then playing rook to d8. I'd like to play knight to d4, but the problem is that the pawns on b3 are always watching the d4 square. That's really annoying. Maybe I should play a5, but then he would be able to play a4. But then I would have knight to b4 if there's no longer a pawn on a3. He's offering a queen's exchange. But that actually loses the knight. I'm going to do queen takes knight. I'll win back the piece. So I take... but I get it. It's a 15-minute game without increment. There's no extra time added. I forgot, usually on the channel I play educational games with a time control and an increment. With each move I would gain, for example, 2 seconds or 5 seconds, depending on what I set as the increment. So here there's no increment, I have only 21 seconds left. I have to play as fast as possible. This is going to be tricky because I have a few extra pawns but not much. So I'm attacking the bishop that is pinned. That's interesting. He'll have to play knight there, but then I could play bishop takes, and if he takes back, I'll have a 4, which will attack his knight that will still be pinned on the file, so here I can win a piece. That's interesting. He can play knight takes c5. Yes, but it's the same. Bishop takes, knight takes, then I take here. He can take on c5 with his knight. No, he doesn't take. I defend. He can still take on c5 with his knight. Now he saw it. I play b6. I'm attacking his knight. I don't have much time left. I don't know if this move is good, but I don't have time. I'm attacking. I only have 13 seconds left. This probably isn't going to work. Only 12 seconds left now. I'm going to play f6. I'm pre-moving my move, meaning I'm anticipating because I don't really know what he's going to play, but I think f6 is pretty good. It protects the knight, and it will give a square for my king. So whatever he plays, normally f6 has been played. Then I'll play king to f7. I'm going to pre-move, anticipate by bringing my king closer. So I don't waste any time, actually. I come here, I'm attacking c4. He'll probably come to protect it with his king, and I'm going to exchange everything because the endgame is winning for me, actually. I bring my king, there you go, and my pawn advances. It's going to go to queen. I wanted to pre-move, but you never know. If I play h4, I could lose my pawn by playing g5, so I'm still going to think about it. I'll pre-move this move h6. There we go. And now I attack his king. I can advance my king, and we're going to win this endgame. Without any added time. More than 9 seconds left, but it should be fine. You never know if he takes, I'm anticipating. You just have to avoid stalemate situations that could happen. For now, his pawn can still move. So there's no stalemate situation. And then I can make a queen on the next move. And I have 8 seconds, so it's all good. So he only has his king now. But I'm not going to make a queen right away. I'm going to come in front. If he comes back, I make a queen. Well, now I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to pre-move my move here, bring my king in, and I should be able to checkmate on the next move. There we go, so he's forced to come there. All right, go ahead. And that's mate. Now let's analyze this opening. My opponent opens with the queen's pawn, so I play knight to f6 to control the e4 square, c4, so that's typical. It's to set up the sequence nc3 and e4. And here we play e6. So the idea is that if white plays knight c3 to prepare the e4 push, as I mentioned, we can play bishop bb4 to pin the knight or push the pawn to d5. But even in this position, white doesn't have to play knight c3. They can also play knight f3, which is the other candidate move. And so here, black usually has two choices. Either they play bishop b4, which is called the Bogo-Indian defense with this check, or they play b6 with the idea of putting the bishop on b7 along the long white diagonal and controlling the e4 square twice. This is called the Queen's Indian defense. But here, with knight c3 and then the move bishop b4, we're in the NIMZO-INDIAN defense. So that's the name of the opening. So we pin the knight c3, and here usually white has several candidate moves, pushing the pawn e3, the queen on c2, as I said, or developing the knight on f3. But my opponent plays bishop d2, so this unpinning is a quite rare move because it still doesn't threaten the e4 push. As we said, I could take the knight, and if he recaptures with the bishop, win the pawn on e4. So here I did kingside castling, and then very surprisingly my opponent plays knight e4, so actually we can see that he doesn't want the pin at all. He wants to solve the problem of the pin, but it's at the cost of losing time. He's going to fall behind in development. As we said, if I take his knight, I'll lose my bishop. So I decided to take his bishop. He recaptured. And then I played d6. with the idea after e4, e5 of trying to fix the e4 and c4 pawns, especially by controlling the c5 square. That's actually what happens next, since after f3 I played c5, trying to lock those two pawns on white squares to make the bad bishop. A bishop, when it's on the same color as its pawns and is blocked inside its own pawn structure, is called a bad bishop. And so this ability to play on the d4 square, and that's what I wanted to do. So here, I declined the exchange of queens. I played queen e7, and I really wanted to play moves like rook d8, knight c6, and later establish myself on the d4 square with the idea that on knight takes I recapture with the pawn, and I would get a protected passed pawn, for example. That's really what I wanted to do, except my opponent played g4, and so there, I could have already considered knight g6, pawn takes and queen h4 check. But I had the idea the next move, meaning I played knight c6. My opponent played a3. So a3, he probably wanted to prevent the knight from coming to b4, but I don't see why I would have gone to b4 in the first place. And now he's actually going to let me sacrifice on g4 under better conditions, since I now have the knight on c6, whereas he played a3, which is less useful. So knight takes g4, and that's the best move. You could also do the opposite. You could play knight takes e4. Still with the idea that when the pawn takes, we get to h4. So the computer approves this. That's good. Queen to h4 check. When I say the computer approves, I mean I analyze the game with the computer and it considers this the best continuation. So here, my opponent goes to d2 on the d file, which is also the best move according to the computer. Well, actually, there aren't really any good continuations anymore because now everything is losing for white. But I thought king to d2 was very dangerous. It is very dangerous, of course, but king to e2 wouldn't have saved him either. In fact, you had to continue with bishop takes g4 check with the skewer, so knight to f3, and here I was thinking, wondering what should be played in this position. And I eventually found, during my analysis, I don't know if you remember, that you have to take the knight and actually play the move f5, so that these two pawns end up being exchanged, opening the f-file so the rook can join the party. At the same time, we're also threatening captures on e4. There will be checks everywhere, of course, like this. As for the move queen e6 check, it's not really dangerous. You just have to play king h8, and in any case, the capture on e4 will follow. So this gave black an irresistible attack. So my opponent moved to d2. So I played rook to d8 check, bishop to d3, then bishop takes g4, knight to f3, and I came to h3. Actually, queen to f2 was stronger, as you probably saw on the channel, because after queen to e2, there's this nice sequence. Rook takes bishop. The idea is that the queen can't take because of the pin. There's a check, so the king takes, and then hop, rook d8 check. And this really bothers white because the king ends up separated from the queen. And if you want to block, what can you block with on d4? I mean, the knight isn't going to come to d4. There would be bishop takes queen, and if we put this knight there, you can always play rook takes knight check. So here, that wins. I didn't play queen to f2. It's true that I played queen to h3, which still gives a winning position, but it's a bit less effective. My opponent plays queen to f1, offering a queen's exchange, but the problem is that the queens are exchanged in a way that lets me get my piece back. So in this position, in the end, I'm 2 pawns up. And I have a better position, better development, and he's under attack on his king. And I'm threatening bishop takes e4, so he played rook to f1. It's true that at this point I realized I only had a few seconds left. Usually on the channel, it's true that I play with an increment, an added time per move. And here I found myself in this position having to win the game very quickly. Well, I played rook to d1, e4, which was going to take on c5. So I'm not going to play out the entire game, but I want to show you something to explain something for those for whom it might not be obvious. So rook d8 check, there was king c3, knight e5, there was king c2, f6, rook f4, king f7. b4, rook c8, and king c3. I wanted to reach this position because here I'm going to take c4. I'm going to initiate an exchange, knight and rook for rook and pawn. Normally this trade isn't advantageous, but it's what we call a simplification. That is to say, I agree to give up my extra piece to provoke a simplification, to try to have fewer pieces on the board and make the endgame easier to win, because now I have 2 extra pawns. And actually, you can pre-move moves. In chess, pre-moving in online play means anticipating your moves no matter what your opponent does. It's true that here, my opponent will have a hard time preventing me from simply a promotion by bringing my king closer and advancing my pawns. I can basically anticipate everything right up to the end until my pawns become queens, and then have all the time I need to checkmate with my queen. So it's true that after knight takes c4, I actually regretted it. I definitely should have played rook takes c4. I didn't have much time, so I played knight takes c4. But he wasn't forced to play rook takes knight. With rook takes c4, I would have forced a simplification. With knight takes c4, he might be able to move his king away to get out of the line of fire and keep his rook. And as long as he keeps his rook, he keeps a piece that will bother me. Of course, black is winning, but given the time I had, it would have made the win more complicated, and I might not have managed to win because of the lack of time. So really, I needed to force the simplification with rook takes c4. And here, since I'm attacking both the king and the rook, he should have taken, and we would have reached the same position as in the game, where it's easy to win. There you go. I hope this game was entertaining and that you had a good time, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures. Goodbye, everyone.